Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, Alice looks down a long road and reports what she sees. She tells the king that she can see nobody coming along the road toward them. The king is amazed and says he only wishes he had eyes as sharp as hers. To be able to see nobody, he marvels, and at such a great distance too. The joke works because the king makes a mistake we are all prone to making. He hears the word nobody and treats it as the name of a person on the road. We do this constantly, and usually without noticing, with one small word. You open the fridge and announce that there is nothing inside. The sentence is meaningful, and on a bad week it is often true. But the word nothing there is not pointing at some item resting on the shelf. It tells you what the shelves lack, not what they contain. The moment we forget this, a strange pressure builds behind the word. Nothing starts to feel less like an absence and more like a peculiar presence. That pressure is the subject of this video, and it is as old as argument itself. The question fits into 4 plain words, and it refuses to stay simple. It surfaces the instant you try to speak about what is not there. It returns when mathematicians build numbers and when physicists ask why a universe exists. Each time the same suspicion appears, that nothing might be doing real work. We will follow that suspicion across roughly 2,500 years. We begin with the first thinker who took the word seriously enough to be frightened by it. His name was Parmenides, and he lived in a Greek colony in southern Italy. He reached a conclusion so severe that every later philosopher had to answer it. He argued that nothing cannot be thought, cannot be spoken, and cannot be at all. If he is right, then most of what we say each day is secretly impossible. We start where he started, on a road that he insists does not exist. Part 1. The road that is not. Consider how easily you talk about things that are not there. Your keys are missing, so you say the keys are not on the hook. You describe a unicorn to a child, though no unicorn has ever lived. You tell a friend that the meeting is not happening on Tuesday. In each case, you seem to refer to something absent or unreal with no trouble. Language reaches past what exists, and we assume it does so harmlessly. Parmenides looked at this everyday habit and found a crack running through it. He wrote in verse, framing his argument as a revelation spoken by a goddess. The goddess lays out the only 2 roads that thinking can travel. The first road says, it is, and it cannot not be. The second road says, it is not, and it must not be. She tells him the second road is a path from which no news returns. You cannot learn what is not, she says, nor point it out in speech. The reasoning behind this is deceptively simple and very hard to escape. To think is always to think of something, some object the mind takes hold of. If you try to think of nothing, there is no object there to be thought. So thinking of nothing is not a thin form of thought, but no thought at all. The same holds for speech, since to speak of nothing is to say nothing whatever. What is not cannot be named, because there is nothing there to receive the name. Non-being collapses the instant you reach for it, taking your words down with it. You can test the pressure of his argument yourself right now in a moment. Try to think of nothing at all, a pure blank with no content whatever. What tends to happen is that you picture empty space or darkness or a void. But empty space is something, darkness is something, and a void has shape and extent. Each time you aim at nothing, your mind hands you a faint something instead. Parmenides treats this not as a quirk of attention, but as a law of thought. Careful readers have long noticed that the little word carries more than one meaning. It can assert that a thing exists, or assert that a thing is some way. Recent scholarship reads Parmenides as making a point about necessity, not bare existence. On this reading, the first road concerns what must be and could not fail to be. The second concerns what cannot be at all, which is why it leads nowhere. Between them lies a third road, the confused path walked by ordinary mortals. On that path, people say a thing both is and is not, and never hold still. From this single restriction, Parmenides derives a portrait of reality that defies the eye. Whatever truly is, he argues, could never have come into being. For it would have to emerge from what is not, and there is no such source. Nothing comes from nothing, so being cannot have a beginning behind it. By the same logic, it can never perish, since it has no nothing to fall into. What is must be whole, unchanging and complete, with no gaps of non-being inside it. Change and plurality require pockets of is not, and those pockets are forbidden. Notice what Parmenides has just done, because it founds a whole style of thought. Your senses report motion, colour, birth and death in every direction at once. His argument reports that none of this can really happen, on pain of contradiction. Faced with this clash, he sides with the argument and against his own eyes. This is the first great act of pure reason overruling raw experience. Every rationalist after him inherits the nerve to say the world is not as it seems. That nerve is not a museum piece, since it runs straight through modern physics. The slogan that from nothing nothing comes survives today as a conservation law. Energy is neither created nor destroyed, only shifted from one form to another. Parmenides would recognize the spirit of that rule, even across thousands of years. His method survives too, the method of deriving reality from principle against appearance. In 1928, Paul Dirac wrote an equation describing the moving electron. The mathematics demanded a mirror particle of equal mass and opposite charge. No one had observed it, yet 4 years later, experiment confirmed the antiparticle. He trusted the logic of the theory over the silence of the laboratory. Parmenides leaves us with a conclusion that is both rigorous and unlivable. If non-being cannot be spoken, then no statement can ever be false. A false claim says of what is that it is not, which the rule forbids. By the same stroke, fiction is impossible, and so is every honest mistake. Yet you lie sometimes, you enjoy stories, and you correct your errors daily. Either the great proof is broken, or the world you live in is an illusion. To rescue ordinary speech, someone would have to attack the argument at its root. That someone was Plato, and he knew the attack would feel like killing a father. Part 2. Committing Parricide. Plato sets his solution inside a hunt, and the quarry is the sophist. A sophist in his portrait sells the appearance of wisdom rather than the real thing. He trades in falsehoods and illusions, in words that seem true but are not. To convict him, you must first say clearly what a falsehood actually is. And here the sophist springs a trap that he inherited from Parmenides himself. A false statement, it seems, must say something that is not the case. It presents what is not as though it were, which is exactly the forbidden move. So the sophist hides behind the old proof, like a child behind a parent. You cannot accuse me of speaking falsely, he says, since falsehood cannot be. To speak of what is not is to speak of nothing, and that is no speech. If Parmenides stands, the sophist is untouchable, and truth has no contrast left. Plato speaks through a visitor from Elea, the home city of Parmenides. The visitor confesses that catching the sophist will require a terrible act. He must lay hands on Father Parmenides and force not being to be in some way. He calls this parricide, the killing of a father, and asks not to be blamed. The drama is real, because the whole tradition rests on the father's authority. The escape begins by noticing that the phrase is not hides two different claims. One claim is absolute, meaning a thing has no being at all, sheer non-existence. Plato agrees with his father that this absolute nothing stays unspeakable. He does not try to rescue it, and that restraint matters for later. The other claim is relative, and it is the one that does all the work. To say a thing is not something is often just to say it is different. To show this, Plato isolates 5 of the most basic ideas thought relies on. They are being, rest, motion, sameness, and difference, and they interweave constantly. Take motion, which plainly is not rest, since the two are opposites. Yet motion clearly is, because it shares in being and is perfectly real. So the sentence, motion is not rest, comes out true and harmless. It does not call motion non-existent, but only marks it as different from rest. Difference, Plato says, is sprinkled across everything that is, like a thread in all cloth. Each thing is itself by standing apart from the countless things it is not. This gives not being a new and respectable identity as a form of otherness. The not beautiful is not a sinister void, but simply whatever differs from the beautiful. Non-being, in this sense, is woven from the most ordinary fact about things. Things are distinct from one another, and distinctness is everywhere you look. Now falsehood becomes possible without summoning any ghostly object into being. Suppose I say that Theaetetus, who is sitting, is flying through the air. My statement takes a real man and assigns him a state different from his actual one. It says of what is, something other than what is, and that is what falsehood is. Modern scholars have sharpened exactly what Plato did and did not achieve here. The philosopher Gwilym Owen argued that Plato targets only one sense of is not. He handles the is not of difference and predication, the not that means other than. He leaves the is not of sheer existence untouched, and arguably on purpose. This raises an honest doubt about whether the parricide really landed. Parmenides may have been most afraid of absolute nothing, of pure non-existence. Plato tamed relative non-being, but left that deeper darkness where he found it. The father, some say, was wounded in the arm and not the heart. Strip away the antique language, and Plato's move is one you make every hour. When you say a shirt is not blue but green, you invoke no void. You locate the shirt among colours by marking what it differs from. Every act of saying no, of distinguishing, of denying, runs on difference. Centuries later, this insight reappeared at the centre of how we study language. The linguist Ferdinand de Saussure held that in language there are only differences. A word means what it means by not being the other words around it. Plato found the seed of that idea while trying to corner a sophist. Plato widened what we are allowed to say, and that was a real victory. But the hardest case slipped through, the case of naming what does not exist at all. Think of Pegasus, the winged horse, who never trod the earth for an instant. When I say Pegasus does not exist, I seem to talk about him in order to deny him. Difference cannot help here, because there is no Pegasus to be different from anything. More than 2,000 years later, this puzzle landed on a logician's desk. He gave the tangle a name, calling it the beard of Plato. His solution was to deny that we are talking about anyone at all. Part 3. Plato's beard. The puzzle that reached the logician is easy to feel and hard to dissolve. Say out loud that Pegasus does not exist, a claim you believe is true. To deny that Pegasus exists, you seem to need Pegasus as the subject of the denial. There must be something you are talking about, or the denial is about nothing. So non-being seems to require a shadow of being just to be denied. Willard Van Orman Quine named this old snare the beard of Plato. It has been tough through history, he said, often blunting the razor of Occam. Two imagined opponents try to save us, and Quine lets each one fail in turn. The first says Pegasus exists after all, but only as an idea inside our minds. This confuses the horse with the thought of the horse, which are not the same. The idea of Pegasus certainly exists, sitting in the minds of many people. But when you deny that Pegasus exists, you are not denying that the idea exists. You mean the winged horse is not out there, which is a wholly different point. The second opponent is subtler, and his fix tempts almost everyone at first. He says Pegasus has being without existence as a merely possible thing. Pegasus waits, unrealized, in a vast realm of things that could have been. Quine answers by asking how many possible men are standing in that doorway. Is the possible bald man there the same person as the possible fat man? There is no way to count them, and no way to tell them apart. The realm of mere possibles is an overcrowded slum with no rules of identity. Worse, the round square cannot even be admitted, since it breaks the law of contradiction. The genuine solution had already been built by Bertrand Russell years earlier. Take the sentence, "The present King of France is bald," spoken today. France has no king, so it is tempting to call the sentence meaningless. Russell instead unpacks it into a claim about how many things exist. It says there is exactly one present King of France and that he is bald. Since no such king exists, that whole claim is simply false, not empty. And it never required a ghostly king sitting somewhere to be its subject. Pegasus, though, is a name, and names do not obviously hide such descriptions. Quine offers a trick that looks strange, but works cleanly. Turn the name into a verb, an action only one thing could perform. Let us say that to Pegasize is to be the winged horse of the legend. Then the sentence, Pegasus does not exist, becomes nothing Pegasizes. The name has vanished entirely, leaving only a description and account. We deny that anything in the world fits the role, and no phantom remains. Underneath the trick lies a famous slogan that reorganized the whole question. To be, Quine says, is to be the value of a bound variable. What you believe exists is whatever your quantifiers must range over to come out true. Existence is carried by phrases like there is and for some, not by names. A name can be empty, a mere label, and your logic will not stumble. So you can deny that something exists without naming a thing that does not. This is not a dusty parlour game, because machines now run on this very logic. Search a customer database for an account that was never created. The system returns an empty result, reporting that no such record is found. It does not invent a phantom customer in order to report the absence. Programmers handle the missing case with a quantifier, asking whether any row matches. Quine would smile because the empty search is his solution made of silicon. Even physics works this way, committing only to what its equations quantify over. The desert Quine offers is clean, but cleanliness here comes at a price. Consider 2 sentences about a detective who never lived in any city. Sherlock Holmes is a detective feels true, while Holmes is a plumber feels false. On the strict view, neither has a subject, so neither can be straightforwardly true. Both should collapse into falsehood together, since there is no Holmes to anchor them. Yet you sought true claims from false ones about him without the slightest hesitation. Something makes detective correct and plumber wrong, even with no man behind the name. That stubborn fact pushed some philosophers to insist such objects are real after all. Part 4. The Golden Mountain. One response to that puzzle is bold, taking the fictional objects at their word. If you reason correctly about Holmes, then there must be a Holmes to reason about. Alexius Meinong, an Austrian philosopher, built an entire theory on this refusal to flinch. He held that some objects have properties even though they do not exist. His central principle separates 2 things we usually run together. One is whether an object exists, which Meinong calls its being. The other is how the object is characterized, the full list of its properties. He insists the second is independent of the first, that character does not need existence. The Golden Mountain is genuinely golden and genuinely a mountain. It simply happens to lack existence, which changes nothing about its description. The round square is just as truly round and square, though it could never exist. Meinong pushes this to a startling conclusion about the status of such objects. They do not exist, and they do not even subsist as numbers might. They lie, he says, beyond being and non-being altogether, as homeless objects. They are not stored in any heaven, yet thought can reach them whenever it likes. There are objects, he writes, of which it is true that there are no such objects. The sentence sounds like a contradiction, and that is precisely his point. Notice how neatly this dissolves the worry left hanging by the clean desert view. You can sort truths from falsehoods about Holmes because he is a real object of thought. Detective belongs to his characterization, so calling him a detective is correct. Plumber does not belong to it, so that claim about him is false. No man behind the name is needed, only an object that carries the right properties. Bertrand Russell admired the theory enough to attack it with everything he had. His first blow concerns contradiction, the bedrock rule of all reasoning. The round square is round, and being square, it is also not round. Menong's jungle is therefore full of objects that violate logic at its foundation. His second blow is sharper, and it uses Menong's own freedom against him. Nothing stops me from describing the existent Golden Mountain, adding existence to the list. By the principle of independence, that object is golden, a mountain, and existent. So it ought to exist, and yet no golden mountain stands anywhere on earth. Menong had answers, though whether they satisfy is still argued today. The law of non-contradiction, he says, governs only what is real or existent. A non-existent object is free to carry clashing properties without bringing down logic. To the existent Golden Mountain, he replies that existence is not an ordinary property. His followers split properties into two kinds to make this precise. Ordinary features, like golden and round, can be freely assumed into an object. Status features like existing and being complete cannot be assumed in the same way. So existent never truly enters the description, and the trap is disarmed. Most people assume this theory was buried by Russell, but it never died. In recent decades, it has been rebuilt with far more care and rigour. The philosopher Terence Parsons formalised the split between ordinary and status properties. Edward Zolter took a different route, dividing the very meaning of the word has. Ordinary objects exemplify their properties the way a real apple is actually red. Abstract and fictional objects instead encode their properties, holding them without instancing them. The round square encodes roundness and squareness, but exemplifies neither in our world. With that single distinction drawn, the old contradiction quietly disappears. The most discussed version today belongs to the logician Graham Priest. Building on earlier work by Richard Routley, he calls his position none-ism. Some objects, he holds, simply do not exist, with no softer grade of being. If you do not exist, you are non-existent, and that is the end of it. His clever move concerns where a non-existent object has its properties. Holmes is not a detective here in the actual world, where he is nothing. He is a detective at other worlds, the ones where the stories run true. Impossible objects get impossible worlds, and there Priest accepts some true contradictions. Every theory in this family leans on one daring rule, and pays for it. The rule says any description you write picks out an object fitting that description. Left unrestricted, the rule is a disaster, as Russell's Golden Mountain already showed. You could describe an existent perfect being and seem to conjure it into reality. So every modern version restricts or reinterprets the rule in some careful way. Parsons limits which properties count, Zolter splits the meaning of haze, and Priest ships them elsewhere. Each repair works, and each has critics who find the price too high. A rival camp denies these objects entirely, treating fictional characters as things authors create. On that view, Holmes is a real abstract artifact made by Conan Doyle, not a beingless ghost. Behind this technical fight sits a fact about your mind you cannot avoid. Every thought is about something, and some of those somethings do not exist. People have searched for the fountain of youth and prayed to gods who may not be. You can fear a monster, want a perfect partner, or seek a cure that is not real. Any account of meaning has to explain how thought aims at what is not there. Today, this problem is concrete, because our software reasons about fictional things constantly. A system can answer that Holmes is a detective and reject that he is a plumber. It treats the non-existent object as having settled properties, exactly as Meinong did. Step back now from Pegasus, from Holmes, from the Golden Mountain and the Round Square. Every theory so far treats nothing as a missing object, a referent that fails to arrive. But there is a different sense of the word, far stranger and more basic. Forget particular things and ask about being itself and about nothing itself. Try to think of pure being, stripped of every property, every shape, every feature. A German philosopher argued that when you do this, something uncanny happens to your thought. Pure being, emptied of all content, becomes impossible to tell apart from pure nothing. And that nothing, he claimed, is not dead, but the engine of all becoming. Part 5. Pure being is nothing. Hegel asks a question that sounds almost too simple to be deep. Where should thought begin if it is to assume nothing in advance? Any starting point with content would smuggle in claims we have not yet earned. So he strips away every assumption, looking for the barest thought available. What remains, when all particular content is gone, is the thought of being. Not this thing or that thing existing, but being as such, with nothing added. Now hold that thought steady and look closely at what you are thinking. Pure being has no quality, no shape, no feature to set it apart. It is completely indeterminate, since any determination would make it this rather than that. But a concept with no content, nothing to mark it, nothing to grasp, is familiar. That is exactly what we mean when we speak of nothing at all. So pure being, thought without cheating, slides directly into pure nothing. The two are the same, Hegel says, indistinguishable in their total emptiness. And yet we clearly meant different things by the words being and nothing. They are the same, and not the same in the very same breath. Hegel says the truth of this tension is a third idea, which is becoming. Being passes into nothing, which we call ceasing, or passing away. Nothing passes into being, which we call coming to be or arising. Becoming is that restless flicker between the two, and it never sits still. Nothing on this picture is not a dead blank lying outside the world. It is one beat of a pulse that drives everything that develops or changes. This little movement is the seed of Hegel's entire method, the dialectic. Each concept, thought through honestly, turns out to contain its own opposite. The tension forces a richer concept that holds both sides together at once. Reality, for Hegel, is not inert stuff, but a process that unfolds by negation. He borrows a phrase from Spinoza that every determination is also a negation. To be something definite is to be marked off, and so to be not other things. Negation is therefore not a flaw in being, but stitched into its fabric. There is a precise modern echo of Hegel's opening claim in the study of information. Information, the theory says, lives in differences, in distinctions that could have gone otherwise. The thinker Gregory Bateson defined information as a difference that makes a difference. Consider a screen that is perfectly uniform, the same value at every single point. It carries no message, because there is no contrast anywhere to read. A field with zero distinctions is, for any observer, the same as no field. Pure being with no determination is empty in exactly that informational sense. You also feel this collapse in ordinary speech whenever meaning is stretched too thin. A politician promises change, but names no policy, no cost, no concrete act. A brand claims to stand for everything good, and so stands for nothing in particular. A word that can mean anything ends up unable to mean anything at all. Total generality, emptied of all difference, folds back into emptiness. Hegel saw that pattern at the root of thought, not only in its surface noise. The argument is dazzling, and it has drawn fierce objections for 2 centuries. The classic complaint is that Hegel quietly smuggles motion into pure logic. Where, the critic asks, does the movement from being to nothing even come from? Becoming is a notion of time and change, not a bare category of thought. Schelling pressed a related point about the phrase, "not yet," that Hegel relies on. To say being is not yet nothing already assumes the very becoming he must derive. Later critics added that Hegel equivocates on the small word being itself. Sometimes being means the empty predicate that we attach to anything that is. Sometimes it names a kind of item, able to be identical with another item, nothing. But to say being and nothing are the same already treats each as a something. The whole proof may rest on sliding between these senses without noticing. If so, the engine of the dialectic turns on a confusion, not a discovery. Hegel's defenders today answer that the critics have misread the transition. The movement is not a process in time, but an instability inside the thought. When you try to think pure being, you find nothing there to hold on to. Your thought has already become the thought of nothing, with no time elapsing. Becoming names that immediate flickering, not a journey from one moment to the next. Critics reply that this defense still slides between our thinking and necessary content. The deeper dispute, whether any beginning can truly presuppose nothing, remains open. From this doubt descend Heidegger, Derrida, and much of later European thought. Whatever its flaws, Hegel changed the status of nothing in a permanent way. It was no longer only a failed reference, a name without a thing. It had become a living category, present at the very birth of every concept. But notice that for Hegel we reach nothing by thinking, by careful reasoning. A later philosopher found that picture far too calm, far too safe. He claimed we do not first conceive nothing and then perhaps feel it. We meet it directly, before any concept, in the grip of a particular dread. And that encounter, he insisted, is something no science can ever put into words. Part 6. The Nothing Noths. Hegel reached nothing by thinking, by following bare being until it emptied out. A later philosopher found that picture far too tidy and far too safe. Martin Heidegger argued that we do not reason our way to nothing at all. We are delivered to it, suddenly, by a mood that strips the world bare. To see how, start where he starts, with the confident work of science. Science studies what is, the beings and facts that fill the world. It wants the things themselves, and, as we say, nothing further besides. That small phrase, nothing further, is where Heidegger plants his question. In waving the nothing aside, science has quietly spoken of it. So what about this nothing, that even the sciences cannot help mentioning? The question sounds absurd, and Heidegger knows it sounds absurd. A logician will answer that there is no such thing as the nothing. The word is just negation, the denial that anything of a kind exists. Nothing means not anything, a move of logic, with no object behind it. Heidegger accepts the grammar, but turns the order of explanation upside down. Negation, the bare logical not, is not the deepest layer here. To deny, to say not, we must already sense an absence, a withdrawal. The nothing, he claims, comes first, and the logical not rides on top of it. But if logic does not reveal the nothing, what could possibly reveal it? Heidegger's answer is a mood, a way the whole world is tuned for us. Not fear, since fear is always fear of some definite thing, a dog, a fall. He points instead to anxiety, a dread that has no particular object at all. In deep anxiety, things as a whole go strange and start to slip away. Nothing in particular threatens you, and that is exactly the point. The world recedes, its meaning drains, and you hover before sheer nothingness. Consider waking at 3 a.m, in a silent and unfamiliar dark. The deadlines and roles that organize your day are still true, but they go weightless. The whole frame that made things matter seems to loosen and float free. You are not afraid of any single thing in the room around you. You are uneasy before everything and nothing, with no object to fix the feeling. Heidegger says that in such a moment the nothing has drawn near to you. Here Heidegger writes the sentence that would make him famous and mocked. The nothing itself, he says, annihilates, a word he had to invent. He does not mean it destroys things, like a fire or a flood. He means it pushes, it repels, it turns us back toward the things that are. In that recoil, beings first stand out for us clearly as beings at all. We are, in his phrase, held out into the nothing, suspended over it. Without that suspension, he argues, we could not face a world or be free. It is tempting to hear all this as a simple blunder about grammar. It sounds as if Heidegger mistook the word nothing for the name of a thing. But that reading is too cheap, and recent scholars reject it firmly. He knows the nothing is no object, and that is precisely his aim. He is straining at the edge of language to point past all particular things. For Heidegger, being itself is not any being, not one more item on the list. Seen from among things, being shows up as no thing, as a kind of nothing. The nothing, he later wrote, is the veil that hangs before being. One piece of this has been confirmed in a place Heidegger never looked. Modern psychology draws a sharp line between fear and anxiety, just as he did. Fear is a response to a present, identifiable threat that you can name. Anxiety is different, an unease aimed at no definite object, anticipating nothing in particular. The neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux separates fear, tied to a present threat, from anxiety. Affective science now draws the same line Heidegger placed at the heart of his account. The objectless dread he described is, for many people, a nightly fact. Heidegger pushes his claim to a point that thrilled some and enraged others. The deepest truths about the nothing, he says, lie beyond the reach of science. They lie beyond logic too, since logic itself rests on something more original. To a circle of thinkers in Vienna, this was not depth, but a disease of language. They held that a sentence means something only if a clear test could decide it. One of them took Heidegger's words and ran them through the machinery of logic. His verdict was not that the sentences are false, but that they say nothing. Part 7. The Charge of Nonsense. Set aside whether Heidegger is right and ask a harder prior question. How do you tell a profound sentence from one that merely sounds profound? Some strings of words feel deep, yet may carry no real content underneath. We sense that gibberish can wear a serious face and fool us completely. Rudolf Carnap believed there was a test that could tell the two apart. His test asks one thing of any sentence that claims to state a fact. Either it is true by its own logic and definitions, settled by meaning alone. Or experience could, in principle, count for or against it in some way. A sentence that meets neither condition states nothing, however grand it sounds. It is not false, which would at least make it a real claim. It is empty, a pseudo-statement, a shape of grammar with no thought inside. Carnap turns this test directly on Heidegger's sentences about the nothing. His first charge concerns grammar that disguises the real shape of a claim. The word nothing dresses as a noun, as if it named some dark object. In strict logic, it is only a denial, a way of saying not anything. There is nothing outside means it is not the case that something is outside. Heidegger treats that denial as a name, then hangs a verb upon it. His second charge bites even if you allow the word to act as a noun. The nothing nihilates has no test, no experience that could ever bear on it. Nothing you could see, measure or undergo would confirm it or deny it. So the sentence is not a deep truth, but a noise in the shape of one. Carnap allows that the metaphysician does have something real to express. It is an attitude toward life, a feeling about existence as a whole. But he reaches for theory when he should reach for art, and fails at both. Metaphysicians, Carnap says, are musicians without the gift of music. Heidegger would not concede an inch, and his reply cuts deeper than it first seems. Your logically correct language, he says, is not a neutral judge of anything. It already assumes that only what science can test is allowed to be real. But that is the very assumption the question of being puts in doubt. To demand that being answer to the logic of mere things begs the question. Logic itself, he claims, floats on a deeper kind of questioning beneath it. The two men are not really disagreeing about the nothing at all. They disagree about whether logic is the final court or a defendant too. And here Carnap's own weapon turns and points back at his hand. His test says a real claim must be logical truth or open to experience. Now apply that test to the test itself and watch what happens. It is not true by definition, and no experiment could ever confirm it. By its own standard, the principle of meaning is itself meaningless. This is not a clever trick, but a wound that never fully healed. For decades, Carnap and his allies tried to repair the criterion with care. Every version they built either let metaphysics quietly back through the door, or it grew so strict that it threw out good science along the way. The general laws of physics reach beyond any finite stock of observations. A rule sharp enough to exclude being would also exclude those very laws. By the 1950s, the philosopher Karl Hempel was charting the failures. The knockout blow against metaphysics never landed as cleanly as advertised. Recent historians read this clash as something larger than one man besting another. The philosopher Michael Friedman calls it a parting of the ways. Two great traditions stood at a fork and walked off in opposite directions. One went toward logic and science, the other toward being and history. They stopped speaking, and the silence between them lasted most of a century. Yet Carnap's question still works as a tool, even shorn of his strict rule. Ask what observable difference a claim would make, and idle talk falls away. That same question now divides physicists at the frontier of their field. Some theories of the deepest structure of reality may resist any possible test. In 2014, leading scientists argued in print over exactly this. If an idea predicts no observable difference, is it physics or quiet metaphysics? Carnap's ghost sits in that room, asking the question he asked of Heidegger. The fight over what counts as nothing had become a fight over meaning itself. While Vienna and Freiburg fought over what can be said, a third path opened. A French philosopher, steeped in Heidegger, moved the whole problem onto new ground. You need not settle the logic, he thought, to know that nothingness is real. You meet it directly in plain situations, long before any sentence is formed. Walk into a cafe at 4, looking for a friend who is not there. His absence, this philosopher insists, is something you see, not merely something you conclude. Part 8. The Absence of Pierre. You arrange to meet your friend Pierre at the cafe at 4 o'clock. You arrive 15 minutes late, push open the door, and look across the room. Everything is there, the tables, the lights, the murmur, the faces of strangers. But you came for Pierre, and Pierre is the one thing the room lacks. You do not check each face and slowly deduce that none of them is his. You see all at once that the whole cafe is missing him. Jean-Paul Sartre builds an entire philosophy out of that ordinary letdown. Pierre's absence, he says, is not just a thought in your head about the room. It is a real feature of the café as you live it, a hole in the scene. The room organizes itself into a background, and his absence stands out against it. His absence, in Sartre's words, haunts the café while you stand in the door. He calls such things little pools of nothingness, scattered through ordinary experience. Distances, lacks, the no longer and the not yet are all pools of this kind. The deep question is where these pockets of nothingness could possibly come from. Sartre splits reality in two, and the split decides the whole answer. On one side stands the being of things, which he calls being in itself. A rock, a tree root, the café's wood and glass, simply are what they are. They are massive, full, packed solid, with no gaps and no lacks inside them. A rock is never missing anything, and nothingness has no home in it. Nothingness enters the world only through the other side, through consciousness. Sartre calls this being for itself, and gives it a startling description. Man, he writes, is the being through whom nothingness comes into the world. To be aware of a thing, consciousness must hold itself apart from that thing. It must, in some sense, not be what it is conscious of to grasp it. It holds itself apart from its own past and future in the very same way. Consciousness is the one being that is what it is not, and is not what it is. That sliver of distance, that inner gap, is the whole secret of freedom. Because nothingness separates you from your past, the past cannot fully push you. Your old reasons and habits sit on the far side of a tiny void. Nothing in the world reaches across that void to decide your next act for you. Sartre's Gambler shows this with painful clarity at the edge of the table. He swore yesterday, with his whole heart, never to gamble again. Now he stands before the wheel and finds the vow stranded behind him, powerless. He must make the whole decision once more, alone in this present instant. This is what Sartre means by anguish, and it is not the same as fear. Stand at the edge of a high cliff and feel the strange pull of it. Fear is the worry that the ground might crumble and throw you down. Anguish is sharper, the recognition that nothing forces you not to jump. Your future conduct is not guaranteed by the self you are right now. You are free, and freedom, felt from inside, can be a kind of vertigo. Because this freedom is dizzying, we spend much of our lives fleeing it. Sartre calls the flight bad faith, the quiet lie we tell ourselves. We pretend to be fixed things with a settled nature that decides our conduct. Think of a waiter whose every gesture is a little too crisp, too exact. He is playing at being a waiter, acting a thing with a fixed essence. He performs solidity to hide the nothingness and the freedom at his core. Bad faith works only because the self is split, the liar and the lied to being one. Notice how far we have travelled from the road of Parmenides. He feared non-being and barred it from thought as a threat to all order. Sartre makes that same nothingness the source of everything human and valuable. Without the inner gap, there is no choice, no project, no future, no self. Nothingness, for him, is not the enemy of meaning, but its very opening. Sartre's pools of nothingness have drawn fresh attention from metaphysicians lately. Some now link his absences to a stubborn puzzle about wholes and lacks in general. But notice the strict line he draws, the line that his whole system depends on. Things, for Sartre, are full and solid, and only consciousness is shot through with nothing. An entire tradition, far from Europe, denies exactly that comfortable division. It says the solid, self-standing thing is itself the deepest illusion of all. On that view, emptiness does not stop at the mind, but runs into the rock itself. Part 9. The Emptiness of Emptiness. When we call something empty or nothing, we usually mean it is not there. So a teaching that all things are empty sounds like the bleakest nihilism. It seems to say that nothing exists and that nothing finally matters, that reading is natural, and it is almost the exact opposite of the truth. The Indian philosopher Nagarjuna meant something far more precise by emptiness, and he built his idea with great care to avoid nihilism on one side. His target is a single assumption that runs through almost all our thinking. We assume that each thing has a nature of its own, packed inside it. A cup, we feel, is a cup by some inner cup essence it simply has. It would be that thing, we think, even standing utterly alone, depending on nothing. Buddhist thinkers gave this supposed inner essence a name, calling it self-nature. It is the idea of a thing that holds its own being, all by itself. Nagarjuna argues that nothing whatever possesses a self-nature of that kind. His reason is that everything arises only in dependence on other things. The cup depends on clay, on the potter, on its parts, on our uses for it. Take away every one of those supports, and no cup in itself is left behind. A thing that leans on others for its being does not hold that being alone. So to exist, in the only way anything ever does, is to lack a self-nature. To be, on this view, just is to be empty, dependent, and bound to other things. This is the step that separates emptiness from the void it is mistaken for. The empty cup still holds your tea, still breaks, still sits there on the shelf. Nagarjuna marks two truths, two levels at which we can speak correctly. By everyday truth, the cup is real, useful, and plainly in front of you. By ultimate truth, it has no essence of its own, and in that sense is empty. Both are true at once, and holding both is what he calls the middle way. It steers between solid essence on one side and sheer nothingness on the other. Now comes the turn that sets Nagarjuna apart from nearly everyone before him. You might think emptiness is at last the one real thing, the ground of it all. Perhaps emptiness is the true nature of reality, hidden beneath the play of things. Nagarjuna blocks that move at once, with a phrase that names his whole vision. Emptiness, he says, is itself empty, with no self-nature of its own. It is only the absence of essence in things, and it leans on those things. Make emptiness into a hidden absolute, and you have smuggled self-nature back in. This is the sharpest possible contrast with treating nothing as a deep something. Where one tradition finds, behind all things, a great nothing as their source. Nagarjuna refuses to let emptiness harden into any such ground at all. Emptiness is medicine, he suggests, and not a new foundation for the world. Grasped wrongly, he warns, it is like a snake seized by the wrong end. It is a raft for crossing a river, to be set down once you reach the bank. Strangest of all, Nagarjuna claims to put forward no position of his own. He only draws contradictions out of the assumptions his opponents already hold. If I had a thesis, he writes, I would be at fault, but I have none. Critics ancient and modern pounce, since that itself looks like a thesis. Is not all things are empty a claim, and is not having no claim a claim? Here the living scholarship splits into two camps that read him very differently. One camp, led by J. Garfield and Graham Priest, sees a true contradiction. Ultimately, they say, all things lack any nature, since that is what emptiness means. Yet emptiness is then the nature of all things, the one thing they all share. So things have a nature and lack any nature, at the very limit of thought. The ultimate truth on this reading is that there is no ultimate truth. The other camp, including Jan Westerhoff, hears no contradiction in this at all. It is plain anti-foundationalism, the claim that no level of reality is the bottom. There is no final story, no view from nowhere, and that idea is perfectly consistent. This ancient debate now rhymes with arguments at the foundations of physics. Some philosophers of science hold that the world is structure and relation, not little things. On their view, fundamental particles have no inner identity standing on its own. An electron is a node in a web of relations, not a tiny, self-contained object. No things, only structures, is strikingly close to no self-nature, only dependence. The same suspicion has been turned by some on the self you take yourself to be. Perhaps it too is a process and a model, empty of any inner core. Nagarjuna pushes the dissolving of things as far as it can possibly go. No object stands on its own, and even emptiness is not a thing behind the rest. Now swing to the opposite extreme and to the most concrete nothing we know. Forget whether tables and selves are, in the end, empty of essence. Look instead at the hole in your sock, a plain and undeniable little nothing. A hole is, by definition, the place where the sock is not there. And yet you can count it, measure it, and a hole in a boat will drown you. Part 10. The hole in the boat. There is a hole in your sock, and everything about it seems perfectly real. You can point to it, see that it is growing, and count that there are two. A donut has a hole, and that hole is part of what makes it a donut. A hole in a tire will flatten it, and a hole in a boat will sink it. By every ordinary test, holes are among the furniture of the world. And yet a hole is, by its very definition, a place where something is not. It is an absence of stuff, a gap in the material, a piece of pure nothing. But nothings are not supposed to have shapes or sizes or fixed locations. Nothings are not supposed to flatten tires or pull boats beneath the waves. So how can an absence be a thing you count and shape and fear? This is the small, sharp problem that opens a much larger door. The tidiest answer is to say that strictly there are no wholes at all. Whole talk, on this view, is just a convenient way of talking about matter. 2 holes in the sock really means the sock is perforated in 2 places. Every sentence about holes should reduce to a sentence about the stuff around them. This pleases the materialist, who wants nothing immaterial cluttering up the world. The most famous version of this fight is a dialogue by David and Stephanie Lewis. A materialist named Argyle insists that everything real is made of matter. Over a piece of cheese, his friend springs a neat little trap on him. "There are many holes in this cheese," the friend says, "so holes must exist." But holes are not made of matter, since they are made of its absence. Argyle escapes by claiming a hole simply is the material lining around it. The hole, he says, is just the perforated rim of cheese, described in a fancy way. The escape sounds clean, but it strains under a few simple questions. A hole and its lining do not even share the same properties. The hole is empty, while the lining is solid, and the two cannot be one. A hole can be a perfect circle, while the cheese around it stays ragged. Counting goes wrong too, when the linings of nearby holes share some of their matter. Lewis himself wrestled with these tangles and never made the reduction fully work. 2 philosophers, Roberto Casati and Achille Varzi, take the bolder path instead. Holes are real, they argue, but they are dependent, immaterial beings. A hole is always a hole in something and cannot float free of a host. If there were no matter anywhere, there would not be one enormous hole. A hole needs a thing to be a hole in, and borrows its place from that thing. It has no matter of its own, yet it has a shape, a size, and a location. They call such beings superficial, real, but parasitic, living at the surface of things. If they are right, the result for our larger question is striking. At least some nothings are real parts of the world, out there, doing work. These are specific, bounded absences, with edges and places, not vague voids. Non-being need not always be banished, nor pushed back into the mind alone. The hole in your tire is there whether or not anyone ever looks at it. It is a definite piece of nothing, and it is a genuine feature of reality. Mathematics, it turns out, has counted holes as real features for a long time. In topology, shapes are sorted by how many holes run through them. A coffee mug and a donut count as the same, since each has exactly one hole. That number survives any stretching or bending as a true mark of the shape. So, one of our most exact sciences treats holes as solid, objective facts. Once, the fate of a nation briefly turned on how to count them. In the United States election of 2000, results hung on partly punched ballots. Whether a hole was truly a hole helped decide who would lead the country. Casati and Varzi grant the hole a place, a spot at the surface of its host. But at least a hole sits somewhere, with a location you could point to. Other absences seem to act on the world while having no location at all. A plant dies because of the water that no one ever poured for it. A patient dies because a doctor failed to act and did simply nothing. Here, the supposed cause is an event that never happened, a sheer omission. Can a thing that did not occur reach into the world and kill. The whole sinks the boat, but is it the whole or the hull that is missing? Part 11. Death by Omission. The question left hanging is whether a pure absence can reach out and cause harm. Start with a case the law treats as obvious, even when philosophy does not. A gardener is paid to water a houseplant while the owners are away. He forgets for 3 weeks, and the plant withers and dies in its pot. We say without hesitation that the lack of water killed the plant. A lifeguard who watches a swimmer drown is charged for doing nothing at all. Yet pause on what we are actually claiming when we blame an absence. We usually picture a cause as an event, a push, a spark, a collision. A cause seems to be a thing that happens, linked to its effect by a process. But the gardener's forgetting is not an event. It is the absence of one. There was no watering, so there is no act there to do any pushing. How can a missing event, a stretch of nothing, kill a living thing? One camp of philosophers takes the demand for a real process very seriously. Causation, they argue, requires a physical link, a transfer of energy or force. On this view, an absence simply cannot be a cause, for there is nothing to connect. The philosopher Phil Dow calls absence cases a kind of quasi-causation instead. The lack of water did not act, he says, but a counterfactual fact is true. Had the gardener watered the plant, that watering would have kept it alive. So absence talk points sideways to the real causing that would have happened otherwise. A rival camp, led by David Lewis, finds no mystery here at all. Causation, for Lewis, is at bottom a matter of what depends on what. One thing causes another when, had the first not happened, the second would not have. On that test, the absence of water passes easily as a genuine cause. The plant died, and had it been watered, it plainly would not have died. No physical thread is needed, only a pattern of dependence between events. Absences fit that pattern as well as any push or spark ever could. But the easy answer drags a serious embarrassment behind it. If the absence of watering caused the death, whose absence are we counting? Had your distant neighbour watered the plant, it also would not have died. Had a stranger in another country watered it, the very same thing holds. By the test of dependence, billions of people caused the plant's death together. Each of them failed to water it, and each failure makes the difference. Philosophers call this the problem of profligacy, the flood of too many causes. There are 2 main ways to stop the flood, and they pull apart sharply. Lewis bites the bullet and agrees that strictly all those absences are causes. We mention only the gardener, he says, for reasons of interest and context. The metaphysics is crowded and equal, while our attention is selective and practical. Helen Beebe draws the line differently by appeal to norms and expectations. The gardener had a duty, so his absence stands out as the abnormal one. On this view, the singling out is built from rules, not from deeper physics. The law has wrestled with exactly this split for a very long time. It usually holds you liable for an omission only when you had a duty to act. A trained lifeguard who lets a swimmer drown is guilty, while a passing stranger is not. Among all who failed to help, the law picks out the one bound to help. The metaphysics treats every absence the same, but the duty does the real selecting. The philosopher Peter Singer turned this structure into a famous moral challenge. Walking past a drowning child you could save is, he argues, a grave wrong. Failing to give money that would save a distant life, he says, is the same wrong. Absences as causes are not a philosopher's toy, but the backbone of real science. In medicine, a disease can be caused by the absence of a hormone or a gene. Diabetes follows from too little insulin, an effect produced by something missing. The modern science of finding causes from data is built on the same idea. Researchers like Judea Pearl model causation as what would change under an intervention. They ask what an outcome would have been had some factor been removed. That counterfactual machinery now drives medicine, economics, and machine learning alike. Suppose we grant that the absence of water did kill the plant. Notice that we treated one little phrase as a solid fact about the world. There was no water is something we take to be flatly, objectively true. For a positive fact, the world supplies a maker, the cat there on the mat. But what in the world makes it true that the water was not there? There is no absence of water sitting in the pot to do the job. When one philosopher said the world contains such negative facts, he nearly caused a riot. Part 12. The Riot over Negative Facts. Behind that puzzle lies a simple idea about what makes any statement true. When you say snow is white, the world cooperates by containing white snow. The truth seems anchored to something out there, a piece of reality that grounds it. Philosophers call that anchor a truth maker, the bit of world a truth answers to. Many find it natural to think every truth must have such a maker. Now try to find the maker for a perfectly ordinary negative truth. It is true that there is no hippopotamus in the room where you sit. What in the room makes that true? What object grounds the absence? There is no hippopotamus present, which is the whole content of the claim. And there is no absence of hippopotamus thing crouching in the corner either. The world seems built from positive things, yet negative truths keep coming out true. Bertrand Russell faced this squarely and gave an answer many found grotesque. The world, he proposed, contains negative facts as well as positive ones. Beyond the fact that the cat is on the mat lies the fact that the dog is not. A negative fact is a real feature of reality, making its negative statement true. Russell reported that when he taught this idea, it nearly started a riot in the room. His audience found the notion of negative facts almost impossible to swallow. He himself, in later years, quietly backed away from believing in them. The discomfort is easy to feel, and one philosopher made it exact. George Molnar laid out 4 claims that almost everyone wants to accept. First, the world is everything that exists, the sum of what is there. Second, everything that exists is positive, a real presence rather than a lack. Third, some negative claims about the world are simply true. Fourth, every truth is made true by something that exists. These 4 cannot all hold together, so at least one of them must fall. The philosopher David Armstrong tried to save most of this with one bold move. Rather than countless negative facts, he posits a single great totality fact. It is the fact that the positive facts are all the facts there are. Add that one capstone, and the negatives follow without separate ghostly entities. There are no unicorns because the real animals are all the animals there are. Yet critics note that this capstone is itself a strange, half-negative thing. To say these are all the facts is still to say that nothing else exists. So the debate stays open, and the living options pull in different directions. Some bite the bullet and keep negative facts, however uncomfortable they sit. Some ground a negative truth in a positive one that rules its rival out. This is not green can be made true by the things being red instead. But nothing positive rules out a unicorn, so that route does not reach every case. Others deny that every truth needs a maker, and let negatives be the exceptions. A negative is true, they say, simply because nothing makes its opposite true. This ancient quarrel is now wired into the machines that run our lives. Ask an airline database whether a flight leaves at 9 tomorrow morning. If no such flight is listed, the system answers that there is none. It stores only positive records, the flights that do exist on the schedule. From their absence, plus the assumption that the list is complete, it infers the negative. Engineers call this the closed world assumption, and it is Armstrong's capstone in code. The program treats failure to find a fact as proof that the fact is false. But that shortcut breaks the moment the records are incomplete. A missing entry might mean the thing is false, or merely that no one logged it. So the newer knowledge systems of the web often refuse to assume completeness. There, the absence of a fact does not let you conclude that it is false. The old metaphysical fight had become a practical choice with real consequences. Across all these chapters, nothing has worn a single face, the face of a lack. It has been absence, negation, the shadow that being casts behind it. But there is one domain where nothing is not a shadow at all. There it becomes a tool, a seed, the most productive idea we possess. In mathematics, the number 0 and the empty collection ground everything else. From nothing, carefully handled, the entire universe of numbers is grown. Part 13. Nothing makes everything. For most of this series, nothing has been the thing we struggle to grasp. Mathematics performs a stunning reversal and turns nothing into a foundation. The first step was to admit a number for nothing at all, the number 0. This was far harder than it sounds, and many great cultures resisted it. The Greeks had no number for nothing, since a number counted real things. How, they asked, could nothing be a something that you place among the numbers? The breakthrough came in India in the year 628. The mathematician Brahmagupta treated 0 as a full number in its own right. He gave rules for it, such as any number plus 0 staying unchanged. The Sanskrit name for it was shunya, the very word for emptiness. That same emptiness sat at the heart of the Buddhist thought we met earlier. 0 reached Europe slowly through the Arabic world and was often met with suspicion. Even Brahmagupta stumbled when he tried to divide by 0, which breaks to this day. Once accepted, 0 proved to be far more than a mark for nothing. It is what lets a place-value system tell 5 from 50 from 500. Without a sign for the empty column, efficient arithmetic barely gets off the ground. 0 is the anchor of the number line, the origin from which we count both ways. It is the number that does nothing when added, yet holds the whole system together. Every digital device you own speaks an alphabet of 2 signs, 1 and 0. But the deepest trick lies one level down, in the foundations of mathematics. There sits a strange object called the empty set, the collection with no members. It is the set of all unicorns, or of all square circles, and it holds nothing. There is exactly one such set, a single container with nothing inside it. Now watch what can be built from this, using only the act of collecting. Let the number 0 be the empty set, the box with nothing in it. Let the number 1 be the set whose only member is that empty box. Notice that this new set is not empty, since it has one thing inside it. It contains nothing, and the containing of nothing is itself a something to count. Let 2 be the set holding both 0 and 1, the 2 we have so far. Each number is just the set of all the numbers that came before it. Climb this ladder and every whole number appears, made of nested emptiness alone. There is no stuff at the bottom of this structure, no material at all. There is only the empty set and the bare act of gathering into a set. From those, mathematicians build the whole numbers, then the fractions and the reals. Nearly the entire edifice of mathematics rests in the end upon nothing. This is the cleanest answer in this series to whether nothing can be something. Properly handled, nothing is not merely a something, but the seed of everything. Honesty requires one sharp qualification, and it is philosophically rich. The empty set is not nothing, but a definite object that happens to be empty. There is a real difference between no box at all and a box containing nothing. The second is a presence, even though what it holds is an absence. So mathematics does not conjure being out of sheer non-being after all. It conjures structure out of the act of bracketing nothing, the form of collecting. What carries everything is not the empty contents, but the shape laid around them. This is not a curiosity at the margins, but the flaw of modern mathematics. The standard foundation builds its entire universe by piling sets upon the empty set. Computing rests on the same base, where the empty case anchors every loop and list. Nothing layered and structured turns out to be astonishingly fertile ground. Still, this is nothing as a concept, living safely on the page. A harder question waits in the physical world, out among the stars and atoms. Is there anywhere a patch of space with truly nothing in it? Part 14. The Horror of the Void. Ask whether a region of space could hold absolutely nothing, a true and total void. For 2,000 years, the dominant answer in the West was a flat no. Aristotle argued that a genuine void is not merely absent, but impossible. In his physics, a moving body's speed depends on the thickness of the medium. In a true void, there is no medium, so a body would move at infinite speed. That seemed absurd, and the absurdity for him ruled the void out entirely. From this grew the famous slogan that nature abhors a vacuum. Any space that threatened to empty would be filled at once by surrounding matter. Not everyone agreed, and an older school had insisted on the opposite. The atomists held that reality is only atoms moving through empty space. Without a void, they argued, there would be no room for anything to move. So the void was debated long before anyone could test it in a room. The test arrived around 1643 from a student of Galileo. Evangelista Torricelli filled a glass tube with mercury and turned it over in a dish. The mercury fell, then stopped, leaving an empty gap at the sealed top. What filled that gap, if anything, was the question that shook the old physics. Torricelli argued the gap was a vacuum with nothing ordinary inside it. The mercury, he said, was held up by the weight of the air pressing down. "We live," he wrote, "at the bottom of an ocean of air, and it has weight." Blaise Pascal saw how to settle the matter and pushed the idea further. If air pressure holds the mercury, then climbing a mountain should lower the column. In 1648, a barometer carried up a peak showed exactly that fall. The higher you go, the less air sits above, and the lower the mercury stands. Nature's supposed horror of the void had been replaced by the plain weight of air. Soon after, Otto von Guericke pumped the air from two joined metal hemispheres. Teams of horses strained at them and could not pull the empty spheres apart. The void seemed real at last, but physics was not finished filling space. Light behaved like a wave, and a wave was thought to need a medium to carry it. So scientists filled all of space with an invisible substance called the ether. In 1887, a careful experiment searched for that ether and found nothing. Einstein then showed the ether was not needed and quietly swept it away. For a brief moment, empty space looked finally and truly empty. Then 20th century physics delivered the deepest twist of all. Empty space, it turns out, is not empty, and never can be made so. Space is filled with quantum fields, and a field can never be perfectly still. Even with every particle removed, the fields hum with restless fluctuation. The lowest state of the vacuum carries energy, and that energy refuses to vanish. The emptiest space we can make is a seething, structured, active medium. This is not a story we tell, but something measured in the laboratory. Hendrik Casimir predicted, in 1948, a strange effect of the vacuum. Place two metal plates a hair apart in empty space facing each other. Fewer kinds of fluctuation fit between them than fit in the open outside. That imbalance presses the plates together with a tiny but real force. In 1997, that force was measured with great precision. The vacuum, the supposed nothing, was caught pushing on solid objects. On the largest scale, the energy of empty space may rule the whole cosmos. In 1998, astronomers found the expansion of the universe is speeding up. The leading suspect is a faint energy belonging to space itself, often called dark energy. By the best measurements, this energy of nothing is most of everything there is. Yet here lies the deepest embarrassment in all of physics. When theory tries to compute that vacuum energy, it overshoots by a staggering amount. The gap between prediction and measurement runs to a 1 with 120 zeros. Our theory of nothing and our observation of nothing disagree more than anything else does. Step back, and the pattern across the centuries becomes hard to miss. Every time we empty a space, we find it was quietly full after all. First air, then the ether, then fields, then the energy of the vacuum itself. There may be no such thing anywhere in the physical world as a perfect nothing. Aristotle was wrong that the void is impossible, but right that space is never bare. Even so, this only sharpens a far older and larger question. Why is there any space, any field, any energy, rather than nothing whatsoever? Part 15. Why is there anything? We have tried all series long to make sense of nothing in its many forms. Now the question turns global and grows as large as a question can grow. Forget particular absences, particular holes, particular empty spaces in the world. Ask why there is a world at all, rather than nothing whatsoever. No space, no time, no matter, no laws, no God, no anything at all. Nothing feels like the simplest state, the one that would need no explaining. Gottfried Leibniz put the question in a single sentence 3 centuries ago. Why is there something rather than nothing, since nothing is simpler and easier? Something is what seems to cry out for a reason, while nothing would not. Many thinkers since have called this the deepest question in all of philosophy. It is the point toward which the whole long story of nothing finally drives. Leibniz answered with a principle he trusted above almost all others. Nothing whatever is so without a sufficient reason why it is so, and not otherwise. Apply that to the universe, the whole collection of things that might not have been. Each thing is explained by an earlier thing, but the whole chain still hangs unexplained. The reason for the chain cannot lie inside it, since every link is contingent. So the reason must lie outside, in a being that exists by its own nature. Such a being could not have failed to be, and Leibniz calls it God. Laid out plainly, the argument has a clear and testable shape. First, whatever exists has an explanation, in its own nature or in a cause. Second, the universe of contingent things plainly exists around us. Third, contingent things do not carry the reason for their own existence. So the explanation of the universe must lie in a being that exists necessarily. Each step looks reasonable, which is why the argument has lasted so long. But every step has been challenged, and the challenges are serious. Why believe the principle that everything must have a sufficient reason at all? Perhaps some things are simply brute, true with no deeper reason behind them. David Hume argued we can always conceive a thing existing with no cause whatever. He doubted, too, that the idea of a being that must exist even makes sense. Whatever we can imagine existing, he said, we can equally imagine not existing. The sharpest version of the doubt came in a famous radio debate. The philosopher Frederick Copleston defended the argument from contingency on the air. Bertrand Russell answered that the whole demand may rest on a mistake. Each human being has a mother, he noted, but the human race has no mother. What is true of every part need not be true of the whole they form. The universe, Russell said, is just there, and that is all there is to it. It is a brute fact on his view, and the demand to explain it is confused. Far from dying, the question has been sharpened by living philosophers. Peter van Inwagen offers a startling reason to expect something rather than nothing. There is only one way for there to be nothing, one single empty possibility. There are infinitely many ways, by contrast, for there to be something. In a lottery with infinitely many tickets, any one ticket has a vanishing chance. So the empty world, the lone ticket, is as improbable as anything can be. Nothing is not the natural default, he argues, but the least likely outcome of all. Derek Parfit reframed the whole problem in a way many now follow. List every way reality could be, including the one where there is nothing. Then ask why this way, our crowded way, is the one that turned out real. Parfit hunts for selectors, principles that might favour one possibility over the rest. Reality might exist because the fullest option won, or because the best one did. Leibniz himself leaned this way, holding that more being is better than less. But that same taste for fullness, pressed hard, can flip into its opposite. If reality favours what is simplest and takes the least effort, watch what follows. An empty world has no things jostling for existence, nothing to produce or sustain. It is the world you would get by doing nothing, and then nothing again. By that logic, the simplest expectation is precisely that there should be nothing. So the question bites from both sides and refuses to settle into an answer. Leibniz assumed a clean contest between something and nothing, and asked why something won. In the late 20th century, physicists claimed they could answer him on their own terms. The universe, they argued, could arise on its own, with no necessary being required. A whole cosmos springing from nothing, with no divine hand to start it. But the entire claim turns on a single slippery word, the word nothing. Part 16. A universe from nothing. In recent decades, a bold claim spread from physics into the wider culture. Science, some argued, could finally answer Leibniz without any need for God. The physicist Lawrence Krauss gave the claim its sharpest and most popular form. His book was titled, with deliberate provocation, A Universe from Nothing. Modern cosmology, he argued, shows how a whole universe can arise on its own. No creator is required, and no first cause outside the physical world. The argument leans on a fact we already met, the restlessness of empty space. A quantum vacuum is never quiet, and particles flicker into being within it. Given the vacuum and the laws of physics, something reliably emerges from the apparent void. Empty space, Krauss notes, is unstable and tends to fill itself with matter. So the existence of particles, he says, needs no maker beyond physics itself. But empty space is still space, so Krauss reaches for a deeper claim. Perhaps space and time themselves can come into being, with no prior moment. He draws on quantum cosmology, on proposals about the birth of space-time. One holds the universe has no first boundary in time, no edge needing a cause. Another describes the whole cosmos tunnelling into being, like a quantum event. On these pictures there is no before, and so nothing for a creator to do. Then a philosopher of physics took the book apart in a famous review. David Albert, who is also a physicist, pressed one devastating point. A quantum vacuum is not nothing, but a particular state of physical fields. Those fields are stuff, as real as giraffes or refrigerators or stars. The vacuum is empty only of particles, while the fields themselves remain in place. The true equivalent of no stuff at all would be the absence of the fields. Albert offers an analogy that lands the objection with great force. In modern physics, particles are just particular arrangements of the underlying fields. A fist, likewise, is just a particular arrangement of the fingers of a hand. Particles flickering out of the vacuum are like fists forming as fingers clench. A fist appearing is no creation from nothing, but a rearranging of what is there. Telling us particles arise from fields, he says, is telling us nothing about true origins. The heart of the complaint can be put in a single line. If quantum mechanics is rich enough to make a universe, then it is not nothing. It is nothing plus quantum mechanics, plus fields, plus laws that govern them. Physics explains one physical state by an earlier state and a rule. It never explains why there are any fields or any laws in the first place. So the deepest question slips through its fingers, untouched by the whole account. Both men are partly right, and seeing how is the important thing. Krauss has shown that empty space is active, and that space-time might have a natural birth. That is a real achievement, and it removes one's supposed need for a creator. But Albert is right that none of this is creation from genuine nothing. Every physical story begins with something, a field, a law, a quantum state. Krauss half concedes this, then turns the charge back on his critics. The philosopher's nothing, he says, with no laws and no potential, may be empty itself. Notice a pattern that has shadowed this entire inquiry from the start. Mathematics built everything from nothing, but only by adding the act of collecting. Physics builds a universe from nothing, but only by adding fields and laws. Each time, the nothing that does the work turns out to be a something in disguise. Some physicists draw a calmer lesson and simply stop demanding an origin. Sean Carroll suggests the universe may just be, with no need to come from anything. It might be a brute fact, complete in itself, owing its existence to nothing further. All of this assumes that nothing is a real option we can set against the world. We picture nothing on one side, something on the other, and ask why something won. But what if that contrast is the error hiding beneath the whole question? What if absolute nothing, examined closely, is not a coherent thought at all? A French philosopher argued exactly that more than a century ago. There is more, he said, in the idea of nothing than in the idea of something. Part 17. The Pseudo-Idea. Every version of the great question rests on a quiet assumption about nothing. It assumes that nothing is a genuine possibility, a way reality could have been. We treat it as the default, the simple state that needed no explaining. Henri Bergson argued that this picture collapses the moment you inspect it. The idea of absolute nothing, he claimed, is what he called a pseudo-idea. Bergson invites you to perform the very act of imagining nothing. Close your eyes, stop your ears, and switch off your sensations one by one. The outer world sinks into silence and darkness, every perception gone. Yet something stubborn remains, and Bergson names it without flinching. I subsist, he says, and I cannot help continuing to subsist. The perceiving self is still there, watching the world wink out. Try to abolish that self too, and the act of abolishing remains behind. So you never truly reach the image of nothing at all. Each time you remove one thing, you replace it with another, or with yourself. Bergson's striking conclusion is that nothing is, at bottom, the idea of everything. It is the image of all things, endlessly expelling one another in a circle. To it we add a feeling, the sense that what is here is not what we wanted. The idea of nothing carries more than the idea of something, not less. His deepest point concerns the little word at the root of nothing, the word not. Negation, Bergson argues, is not a plain description of how the world is. To say the table is not white is to correct an expectation that it was. It is a judgment about a judgment, an answer aimed at someone who guessed wrong. Affirmation can face reality directly, but negation always faces another claim. So negation cannot by itself conjure a wholly new thing called nothing. If Bergson is right, the consequences for our central question are severe. To ask why there is something rather than nothing is to oppose the full to the full. There was never a real nothing for something to defeat or to emerge from. The question is a pseudo-problem, built on a phantom second term. Being does not have to explain itself against a void, because the void was never there. A sharper, more recent version of this doubt comes from logic itself. Suppose absolute nothing obtained, with no objects, no space, no laws whatever. Then it would be true that nothing exists, and that truth is itself something. A world with truths in it, with facts holding, is not a world of sheer nothing. Worse, even the empty world would be a possible world, and possibility is something. The moment you describe absolute nothing, you smuggle a something back inside it. This is, oddly, where the physicist and the philosopher of intuition meet. Krauss, too, insisted that the philosopher's perfect nothing is an empty demand. A nothing with no laws and no potential, he suspected, may be no real thing. From very different directions, both arrive at the same unsettling thought. Perhaps nothing has never been available to us, in thought or in the world. But the defenders of the question have a serious reply, and it must be heard. That we cannot picture nothing does not show the idea is incoherent. We cannot picture a four-dimensional shape either, yet the concept is perfectly sound. Imagining and conceiving are different, and Bergson may have confused the two. We can describe the absence of all concrete things without forming any image of it. And a truth is not a concrete object, so a world of no objects need not contain stuff. There might be no things at all, even if some bare truths still hold of that world. This reply reshapes the question into something more modest and more defensible. Stop asking why there is something rather than utter, truthless nothing. Ask instead why there are any concrete things rather than none at all. That smaller question may be coherent even if the larger one is not. And it turns on whether a world empty of all concrete things is truly possible. One ingenious argument claims to show that it is by simple subtraction. Part 18. Subtracting the world. The question now has a precise shape, stripped of its older confusions. Could there have been no concrete things at all, no matter, no objects? Note that this leaves room for numbers and truths, if such things exist. It asks only whether the physical furniture of reality might have been wholly absent. Philosophers call the claim that this is possible metaphysical nihilism. In 1996, the philosopher Thomas Baldwin offered a clever proof of it. He called it the subtraction argument, and it works by removing things one at a time. Begin with a world that contains only finitely many concrete objects. Think of a sparse world holding just 3 simple rocks and nothing else. This already seems possible, a modest and unremarkable way for a world to be. Now add 2 assumptions that each look entirely reasonable on their own. First, each of those rocks is contingent and might simply not have existed. Second, removing one rock does not force any new thing into existence. The other rocks do not depend on the first one for their being. So, from the 3-rock world, a 2-rock world is clearly possible as well. Subtract again, and a 1-rock world stands as an equally possible arrangement. Take that final rock away, and you reach a world with no concrete things at all. The conclusion is radical, but the steps that reach it look almost dull. An empty world is possible, built from finitude, contingency and independence alone. There did not have to be anything concrete, on this argument, at all. This cuts directly against Leibniz, who needed a being that could not fail to exist. If the world could have been empty, then nothing concrete is necessary. The argument has been attacked from several directions, and the attacks are sharp. The hardest worry concerns that very last step, the removal of the final object. Each earlier step left a world with some objects still standing in it. The last step leaves no objects, and critics ask whether that is still a world. The philosopher Edward Lowe argued that something may exist of necessity after all. If even one thing cannot be removed, the subtraction never reaches the empty world. Others charge that the key premise quietly assumes the very nihilism it should prove. The empty world also revives the old problem of negative truths from earlier. Suppose nothing concrete existed, so that it was true that nothing concrete exists. What in that barren world could possibly make that very truth true? There is no object there to serve as its maker by the world's own emptiness. So either some truths need no maker, or the empty world is not truly empty. Even nothing, it seems, must leave behind a truth about its own nothingness. There is also a quiet clash between this argument and the physics we saw. The metaphysician subtracts objects freely, as if space were a stage to be cleared. But physics suggests you cannot empty space, since the fields and energy remain. To reach a truly empty world, you must subtract space and time themselves. Whether space-time is one more object, or the stage objects stand on, is unsettled. The philosopher's empty world and the physicist's vacuum may not be the same place. Some thinkers push even past this, to the strangest position in the whole field. Metaphysical nihilism says there could have been no things, while granting there are. Ontological nihilism says more wildly that there are no things, even now. On this view, reality has no objects at all, only features and happenings. One would describe the world by saying it rains, with no thing that does the raining. It is the furthest anyone has tried to take the thought that nothing is everything. The subtraction argument promises that everything concrete can be taken away. But across this entire series, one finding has returned again and again. Every nothing we examined was hiding a something we had not yet noticed. The void held fields, the empty set held its form, the empty world holds truths. So one last question remains, and it may be the deepest of them all. Is there a something that cannot be subtracted, a residue that nothing can remove? Part 19, the something we cannot subtract. Look back over the whole road we have travelled, and one pattern stands out. Every time we reached for nothing, it turned in our hands into something. Parmenides found you cannot think non-being, since thought always grasps a thing. Try to picture nothing, and you get darkness, silence, a void, all of them something. Empty the sky, and physics fills it with fields, energy, and restless fluctuation. Build from the empty set, and a hidden form, the act of collecting, does the work. Even absolute nothing would not stay empty when we looked straight at it. To say nothing exists is to state a truth, and a truth is already something. The empty world still leaves possibilities standing, the bare fact that it could be. A universe from nothing turned out to mean a universe from fields and laws. Across logic, physics and mathematics, the result was stubbornly the same. Nothing, pursued to its limit, refuses to remain nothing for long. So we can finally ask whether there is a something that cannot be removed. Several candidates present themselves, and none is easy to subtract away. The truths of logic and number seem to hold in any world, even an empty one. 2 and 2 make 4, it appears, whether or not anything concrete exists. Possibility itself is another residue, the space of ways things might have gone. And there is the questioner, the one asking why there is anything at all. That last residue is the most intimate and the hardest to escape. For the question to be raised, there must be someone there to raise it. Bergson saw it, the self that remains while it tries to abolish the world. We who ask why there is something are inescapably on the side of something. This does not prove that being is necessary, only that we cannot stand outside it. From within existence, the total absence of existence can never be observed. On the largest question, honesty demands that we lay out the living options. One view holds that there is something, and that this is simply a brute fact. The universe is just there, Russell said, and the demand to explain it is confused. A second view insists the opposite, that something must exist of necessity. There is a being on this account that carries the reason for its own existence. Leibniz called it God, and able defenders still argue this way today. A third view says the question itself dissolves under careful pressure. If absolute nothing is a pseudo-idea, then something never had a rival to defeat. A fourth view grants the question, but answers it without any necessary being. The world could have been empty, so the something we have is merely contingent. Why this contingent something obtained might come down to chance or to no reason at all. A fifth view argues that something was, all along, overwhelmingly the likeliest outcome. Return now to the question that began this whole inquiry. Can nothing be something? And the answer turns out to have many layers. In logic, nothing and non-being are not names, but ways of denying and quantifying. Most ancient puzzles dissolve once we stop treating nothing as a hidden object. Yet even there, some insist that objects which do not exist are real all the same. In metaphysics, nothing is not inert, but woven through the heart of being. It is the engine of becoming, the gap that makes us free, the opening that lets things appear. For one tradition, emptiness is the very nature of everything that exists. Here, without question, nothing is something, a feature of mind and of the world. In plain life, some absences are real, located, and able to act upon us. A hole can sink a boat, and a missing dose of insulin can end a life. And in mathematics, nothing given form becomes the seed of all number. In the physical world, there may be no genuine nothing to be found at all. The emptiest space we can make still hums with energy and structure. And in the final, largest sense, the question stays open and unresolved. Whether nothing could have stood where the world stands, no one has settled. But the long failure to reach it tells us something we should not ignore. The deepest result of this inquiry is not a final answer to the great question. It is a discovery about the question and about the word at its centre. Nothing is the one thing we can neither reach, nor make, nor fully think. Every road toward it arrives, in the end, at some quiet, irreducible something. Perhaps that is as close to an answer as we are going to come. Not a proof that being must be, but a search that never once found its absence. So the question turns out to answer itself, quietly, in the very act of asking. For the question to be posed, there is already a world and a mind within it. And nothing, the moment we hold it up to the light, has become something in our hands.